Ghost town Christchurch filled up with people again today, and sometimes it seemed like they'd all converged on what's become the city centre shrine, now carpeted with love and flowers and teddies. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern signed the official book of condolence in Parliament. Then, following a cabinet meeting, she announced that a Firearms Reform Act would be presented within 10 days.
The terror attack in Christchurch on Friday was the worst act of terrorism on our shores. It was, in fact, one of the worst globally in recent times. It has exposed a range of weaknesses in New Zealand's gun laws. The clear lesson from history around the world is that to make our communities safer, the time to act is now.
Yesterday, we'd visited this Christchurch gun shop. There'd been reports of panic buying in anticipation of exactly this. Today, the shop's owner held a news conference.
I've informed the police that Gun City sold the alleged gunman 4 A-category firearms and ammunition. All Gun City sales to this individual followed a police-verified online mail order process.
He claimed his guns had not been used in the Christchurch mosque attacks. On Saturday, when 28-year-old Australian Brenton Tarrant was charged with murder, the judge ordered that his face be pixelated to preserve his fair trial rights. It emerged today that Tarrant plans to represent himself. There are concerns he'll want to use the trial to promote his white supremacist agenda. In a Christchurch park this afternoon, next to Al Noor Mosque, children spontaneously performed a Māori haka to honour their dead school friends. Tarrant's poisonous views on race find no traction here. I'd challenge anyone to read these expressions of togetherness and not have to choke back tears. We've spoken to elders of the Muslim community, and they say the outpouring of emotion and the messages of support from their fellow New Zealanders has not only given encouragement and strength, but has actually served to unite this country, which is exactly the opposite of what the killer sought to do. And that's precisely what the Sheikh who founded the Islamic Ulama Council of New Zealand told me. He's here coordinating funeral arrangements.
The response of the large community of New Zealand was very amazing, touch our heart, make us confident, and really we feel that we can stand up together against these people. We want to know if this killer is alone or there is organization or people behind him or with him, because without that we keep feeling unsafe, and we don't feel that we can walk as used to do before.
Do you believe there was an intelligence failure?
This we can't say till we see the investigation, to be honest, but I can believe that there is something missing. Our question and the community question want answer for it, why they didn't focus on this man, why they didn't control him, why they didn't stop him before he do this disaster.
I asked if he was concerned by the apparent rise of racism, Islamophobia and white supremacism.
Of course, this is something is global problems. It's not like just for New Zealand, and every Muslim, especially they live in Western country, they face this racism and Islamophobia from extremist people. Every hate speech, give courage to those people to do that, especially if the one comes from the president of the United States. You are talking about it, you will get like power, indirectly power, or green light. That's what you are doing is right. And it's not, to be honest, not only Donald Trump's. We have only other politicians in Australia, example, in other countries, they have the same speech, hate speech, and this definitely will put the fire, or we put the fuel in the fire and make the thing worse.
And you believe that is increasing?
Of course, that's increasing, definitely.
A few hours later, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced an inquiry into the attack. Australian singer-songwriter John Williamson posted some poignant verse about Tarrant's rampage on Instagram today. The answer to your menace is not what you would dream. Flowers of love have blossomed. That's what the world has seen.
Well, as families wait for bodies to be returned for burial, stories of heroism are emerging from Christchurch. Stories like that of Husna Ahmed, who was credited with saving many lives at Al Noor Mosque on Friday.
She led several women and children to safety before returning to look for her husband, who used a wheelchair. She was shot dead on her way back in. Described as courageous, caring and dedicated, Ms Ahmed, who was 45, leaves behind a teenage daughter.
She said, "Are you telling me I don't have a mother?" I said, "Yes. But I am your mother now. I am your father now."
In an act of extraordinary generosity, her husband says he has forgiven his wife's killer.
I want to hug him and say, I have forgiven him. I want to tell him, if he has any mother, I want to hug her too.
The youngest victim, Mukad Ibrahim, was just 3 years old. His family had hoped to bury him today. Many bodies, though, are still being formally identified. 14-year-old Syed Milne, who had gone to the mosque with his mother on Friday, had been an aspiring footballer. 33-year-old Atta Alayan played for the New Zealand five-a-side futsal team. He had himself just become a father.
Well, the gunman's live stream of the Christchurch mosque shootings was one of the most shocking aspects of last Friday's attack. Social media platforms immediately came under fire for not doing more to block such content. But even now that the actual video has been taken down, questions remain about the willingness of some of the world's biggest companies to engage with questions over their response to the attack and far-right extremism. Jane Deeth reports.
As the horror of what happened in Christchurch sinks in, still there are people trying to get the footage of the killings onto the internet. Facebook, where the suspect Brenton Tarrant broadcast the killings, says it's removed 1.5 million videos. But why couldn't it react in time to halt the horrific 17-minute live streaming of the massacre?
We've been asking to speak to Facebook's head of global affairs, Nick Clegg, since Friday, the day the attack happened. But the company has only been communicating via written statements, quoting a spokeswoman in New Zealand. Nobody from any continent has been prepared to come on camera and face questions.
Today, the government said technology firms were too late.
Mr. Speaker, social media platforms should be ashamed that they have enabled a terrorist to live stream this evil massacre and spread this mantra of hate to the whole world.
The government's promising proposals to shut down what it says are safe spaces where people can share sick views. When Brenton Tarrant announced his impending attack, it was advertised on 8chan, an anonymous message board which you might not have heard of. But in his video before he opened fire, Tarrant pointed people to the world's biggest video site, YouTube, and its richest star, PewDiePie.
I'm white. Can I make that comment? But I do think that's a problem.
He's had to deny allegations he's a racist. Close to 90 million people subscribe to his channel. He's said he's absolutely sickened Brenton Tarrant uttered his name. At the weekend, swastikas and the message, "Subscribe to PewDiePie," Brenton Tarrant's exact words, appeared at a school in Oxford. Police are investigating. Google, which owns YouTube, says it's removed tens of thousands of videos and terminated hundreds of accounts, but there is much more work to do. This expert on political violence says the mainstream media, not just the internet, is guilty of giving far-right nationalists space compared to other extremists.
I don't think that this is something that is produced through social media space at all. This is leaking over from the mainstream. This is mainstream political discourse at this point. You know, Islamophobic rhetoric, anti-immigrant sentiments, you know, anti-women sentiments. These are not something that you're finding in the dark corners of the internet. These have been normalized in the biggest political campaigns of the last recent years.
In Stanwell in Surrey, a man's been arrested after a stabbing police have declared a terrorist incident.
Shouting out, all Muslims should be dead, kill all Muslims, white supremacy rules.
There have been other arrests over apparently racist references to the New Zealand attacks in the street and online. We can probably expect more.
Well, joining me now is the Labour MP Joe Stevens, who's a member of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Parliamentary Committee. The live streaming for 17 minutes, the uploading countless times of this horrific footage has shocked people. How urgently do you think governments around the world should respond?
This has been urgent for some time. I mean, the atrocities over the last few days have just shone a real light on this in a way that it hasn't done before. But we've been calling in Parliament here, as in our Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, for action from the government. And there's been calls for action all around the world. And I'm afraid that the age of self-regulation for big tech companies and social media companies has gone. You know, they've had their chance and they've blown it.
I mean, I have heard similar sentiments around the world, the US, the EU, the UK. I mean, the UK digital minister today said that 15 voluntary codes of practice have been agreed with online platforms since 2008. Why do you think it has taken so long for governments to arguably protect citizens better?
Well, I think the approach has been, it's almost like the whack-a-mole game. The social media companies will never do anything proactively, so they will only ever take action, and then they don't take very much action when something happens and they're forced into a position to do it. We've been waiting for the government to publish its online harms white paper for some time. Our committee published its interim report last summer, and we had a very poor response into our recommendations from government. We published another report just a few weeks ago, and now we need, we really do need some urgent action, because these companies, they're quite happy to take the plaudits and the profits, but they're never happy to accept the consequences of what their sprawling services are enabling.
Well, Facebook, YouTube would say that they are doing quite a lot. They're removing a lot of videos. I mean, is it unfair to blame online platforms for the filth that people want to put on them?
Well, they argue that they are not publishers. You know, they refuse to be regulated in the way that other publishers, like broadcast media or print media, are, because they say they're not responsible for the content that's uploaded onto their platforms. But they do perform editing functions, so they did take stuff down, not quickly enough. So this argument that they're not publishers, I don't think holds. And so we now need to force them into a position where, and the recommendations that we've made include a statutory power for an independent regulator, with a code of ethics, with sanctions, legal powers if they're breached, and to make sure that where they do not follow those rules, that they suffer a heavy financial sanction, because I'm afraid with these companies, the only thing that will make them change their behaviour is if you hit their bottom line.
Is there a worry that if you bring this regulation in, and it looks as if around the world that's where we're heading, that these kind of horrific views will be driven underground and will actually be harder to keep track of?
Yes, but you've got to remember that these platforms have prided themselves on their innovation and the speed at which they can make technological changes. I mean, Facebook's motto is move fast and break things. Now, with that innovation has to come responsibility, and they need to look not just at what the end of what they want to do is, they need to look at the risks that path creates, and put measures in place to make sure that risk is mitigated.
Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg refused to come in front of your committee. We have not been able to interview anyone from Facebook for our programme. Is that smart or arrogant, do you think?
It's arrogant, it's contemptuous, and I'm afraid it's a pattern of behaviour that we've seen, particularly from Facebook, over the last 2 years. Refusal to have any scrutiny, refusal to give answers, and I think Mark Zuckerberg needs to seriously think about whether or not, his company should carry on as it is, or they should make major changes to it. I felt that the live streaming, they should have stopped uploads immediately. They knew what was happening. Never mind trying to take the content down. They should have shut off the mechanism for uploading until they had a way of sorting this out.